She was once hailed as the Lauryn Hill of Atlanta until a rainy night in 1995 when her car turned that final corner and vanished for good in June 2023 after days of relentless rain. A stretch of old highway near Atlanta suddenly gave way. As a work crew cleared the collapsed roadbed, they stumbled upon the front end of a buried car silver paint. 90s body style, wedged more than 6 feet deep in the earth, jutting through the shattered windshield, was something no one expected an arm. Its fingernails chipped, but still painted red. The license plate read GIA 4195, one of Georgia's oldest and coldest missing persons case tags. The camera glides slowly from the rusted frame to the stunned faces of the rescue team. One of them quietly pulls out a phone and dials emergency services. They don't know it yet. But the woman buried beneath that dirt is Marla Jackson. And just like that, a case nearly lost to time is thrust back into the light with one haunting question: who made Atlanta's most promising voice disappear and how? After nearly 30 years, did no one ever find her? Marla Jackson was born in 1973 in College Park, a struggling neighborhood south of Atlanta where black families lived, crowded together in leaning houses, their backyards strewn with trash, even as a child. Marla stood out, her clear, powerful voice would drift out of a second-floor apartment window where she lived with her mother, Ruby Jackson. Ruby was a resilient janitor who juggled 3 jobs just to raise her daughter. They didn't have much, but on warm summer nights, when the radio played Marvin Gaye or Aretha Franklin, Marla would stand in front of the mirror and sing along, eyes shining like she saw a whole different life waiting for her. Her mother used to say, "That girl sings like she's sending up a prayer." But Marla didn't sing just to escape poverty. She sang because in music, she found the freedom that the world around her never gave. During her years at Tri-Cities High School, she swept local talent shows. One of her former music teachers recalled, "She didn't need a mic. That girl could silence a room with one note," despite growing up in an underfunded district. Marla earned a spot at Clark Atlanta University, majoring in music and performance, where she quickly built a name for herself not just on campus, but among local arts organizers too. One surviving cassette tape in the WCLK radio station archives captures a 1994 live performance. Marla sings an original soul ballad, her voice raspy, raw with emotion, the way she paused mid-verse, as if swallowing tears. Convinced many she wasn't just a singer, she was a storyteller. Strangely, even with a voice like gold, Marla never chased a record deal. In a rare campus radio interview, she said, "I want to sing like me, not how they tell me to. I don't want to be a product." That fierce independence made her shine and also made her a problem for some in the industry. One local producer put it bluntly, Marla had everything except the willingness to play along. And sometimes, that's the one thing they need to mold a star, so while her peers hustled for contracts. Marla stayed in her dorm room, recording on a secondhand setup, mailing out demos, and performing wherever she could, from weddings to open mics in Decatur. Everyone who met Marla said the same thing: she wasn't just talented, she had grit, in a city where young voices often had to compromise just to get airtime. Marla chose the slower but more honest road. Instead of rushing into binding deals, she learned how to produce, to mix, even taught music lessons to afford old recording gear. She knew exactly what she wanted, said her mother, Ruby, and she wasn't about to trade her pride for an easy break. That conviction didn't always sit well. Some music faculty said she was too stubborn. They urged her to pick more commercial songs, to work with bigger names in the studio. But she refused. Marla wasn't rebellious. A classmate said she just wouldn't be shaped into something she wasn't. Ironically, that same refusal made her unforgettable at a campus music showcase. Marla brought the room to a hush with a self-written song called Free Enough about a young black woman caught between 2 worlds, one that demanded she be obedient and grateful, and another that denied her worth altogether, with a simple melody, cutting lyrics, and eyes locked with the audience. The performance became a campus legend. Cassette copies of it were passed around for weeks, something almost unheard of back then. Close friends say that just before she disappeared, Marla was putting the finishing touches on her debut EP. She recorded during night shifts at a tiny studio on the city's east side, squeezing in sessions after classes and jobs. She wrote the lyrics, arranged the music, did the mixing herself, a process she once called rescuing my voice from the market. She confided to a close friend, "I don't want to be famous because someone told me I should be. I want to be remembered because I said something real with my music now." That promise to say something real is what's pulling people back, wondering if Marla discovered something dangerous, something that made her feel threatened. Is it possible her music was hiding a message, and could someone have silenced a voice that never even got its chance on stage? In spring 1995, Marla was invited to perform at a major event, the city's annual Indie Artist Showcase in downtown Atlanta. It was a prime opportunity where producers, music execs, and cultural reporters scouted for the next breakout act, according to her best friend, Kenya. Marla had been preparing for weeks. No stylist, no cover songs, just a brand new original she wrote herself, Letters I Never Sent. A haunting ballad told from the point of view of a woman betrayed by someone she trusted, though Marla never confirmed if it was autobiographical. Still, the lyrics led many to believe she was speaking from personal, possibly painful, experience. Kenya recalled that night. She showed up at rehearsal with a garment bag, a head wrap, and her old music notebook. She said, after the show, she wanted to rest for a while, maybe go home to her mom's, but she never got to perform when her slot came up. Marla was nowhere to be found. Organizers called, texted, searched the venue. No one knew when she'd left the rehearsal space. Her car, a 1993 Nissan Altima, was missing too. The last confirmed sighting was around 5 p.m., when she left the university parking lot to go home and change. After that night, her phone went dark. No pings, no bank activity, no contact, not even with her mother. Ruby searched everywhere: clinics, bus stations, gas stops. She even went to the police to file a missing persons report, but was told she's probably just off somewhere for a few days. For the first 3 weeks, police didn't even open an official investigation. In their eyes, a 22-year-old black woman living alone, singing at night, she could have just left on her own. Then the media got wind, and the story shifted. Maybe Marla ran away. Maybe she was tired of life. Rumors swirled about an older man seen near her gigs. Some claimed she left Atlanta to chase her dreams elsewhere. But her mother knew, "My baby never went anywhere without calling me." And from that day on, Ruby began her near 30-year journey to find her daughter battling silence, indifference, and a city that seemed to forget Marla Jackson ever existed. May 14th, 1995. Atlanta's weather took an unexpected turn. A massive thunderstorm rolled in from the city's west side, turning the bright afternoon sky into a thick wall of gray in under an hour. Marla was believed to have left her dorm around 5:15 p.m. She wore a light denim jacket, her hair tied up, and carried a classical guitar in a black fabric case. Her roommate didn't think much of it. Marla often went out for gigs, sometimes came back late, sometimes stayed over with friends, but this time she never returned. As night fell and the rain hammered down on the dormitory's tin rooftops, Marla's best friend, Kenya, started to worry. They had made dinner plans after the performance. Kenya called her at 8:30, no answer. Then 9:00, then 10:15, then close to midnight, each time ringing out to voicemail. At first, Kenya thought maybe Marla had gone off with someone. But when she arrived at the venue, the Mason Hall Arts Center, the organizers told her Marla had never shown up. Her name wasn't on the check-in list. No one had seen her backstage. The entry pass she'd received the day before had never been scanned. The next morning, Kenya went to Marla's dorm. Everything was untouched, her bed unused, the covers neatly folded, her signature black performance shoes still in the corner. That wasn't like her. Marla always wore those soft-soled shoes to perform. Nothing appeared stolen, no forced entry. The only missing items her guitar and a light brown shoulder bag. Kenya began asking around classmates, professors, mutual friends. No one knew anything. Marla's mother, Ruby, started calling every police station in the city, trying to file a missing persons report, but like many black families at the time, she ran into a brutal reality. Police didn't act quickly unless the missing person met a certain priority profile. An internal report would later reveal that it took 10 full days for Marla's information to be officially entered into the federal missing persons database. By then, it was too late to track her phone, too late to pull security footage from ATMs or traffic cameras. The police did open an investigation eventually, but it relied mostly on testimony, and most of it went nowhere. They interviewed a few fellow performers, some staff from the showcase venue, and one night security guard who claimed he might be seeing a silver car heading toward I-285 in the rain, but he couldn't be sure who was driving. Weeks passed, information dried up. A few radio stations ran the story, a couple of newspapers printed short blurbs, then nothing, as if Marla had never existed. 3 months after she vanished, life in Atlanta moved on. But for Ruby Jackson, time stood still. She refused to let go. Every morning after her shift at Grady Hospital, she would sit on her porch with a small tape recorder, recounting every detail she could remember the day Marla cut her hair, the last hug before she left for school, the strange, uneasy feeling she had when her daughter walked out the door. She recorded it all away to preserve memory, in case someone, someday, was ready to listen. By August, a community meeting was held at the local church. There were no religious leads in the case, but neighbors gathered anyway to share stories, to keep Marla's name alive. Kenya spoke. A former classmate mentioned a possible lead, an older white man who had reportedly been seen watching Marla during an open mic night in Decatur. When police were told, they dismissed it. No license plate, no photo, no hard proof. In their eyes, the case was cold. No body, no crime scene, no signs of foul play. A radio host at WCLK, the same station that once aired Marla's music, tried to revive interest by airing a special memorial broadcast. They played Letters I Never Sent at the exact time Marla had been scheduled to perform, hoping someone out there might remember something. But no one called in. And when Kenya later asked to retrieve the original recording from the station archive, she discovered something chilling. The master tape was missing. A technician said it was probably misfiled or recorded over, but Kenya didn't believe it. Marla's disappearance became a silent scar in the community. A new semester started. Her name vanished from class rosters, her library account, school email, all locked. Every trace of Marla in the system slowly erased, like she had never been there. Friends moved away. Ruby aged visibly, her hair turning from black to silver in just a year. Still, she held on to one ritual every May 14th. She returned to the Mason Hall. She stood quietly at the back of the auditorium, staring at the empty stage, the one her daughter was supposed to have stood on. Then came a strange call. In the winter of 1996, a tip came into the police station anonymous. A man's raspy voice said only one sentence. "Ask about the lot behind the old construction site, near Warehouse 6. Then the line went dead. Police did check it out, but by then, the area had been flattened for a new parking lot. There was nothing left to find, and Marla Jackson's case remained in the file marked pending unknown circumstances. In 1998, 3 years after Marla disappeared, a nearly forgotten moment resurfaced. A group of documentary film students at Emory University created a senior thesis project on unsolved disappearances in Black communities. Out of dozens of names, they chose Marla for one simple reason. She was the voice we grew up with, and then she was just gone. They interviewed Ruby, recorded stories from friends and former teachers, and uncovered a handwritten lyric sheet from Marla's dorm, a song never released. At the bottom, scrawled in red ink, were the words, "If I don't say it, who will?" The film was never publicly aired, but one copy was screened at a small campus event. In the audience that night sat a quiet, middle-aged sound technician named Reggie. He said nothing throughout the screening. Afterward, he tracked down the students and gave them an old cassette. On the label, just one-word demo when they played it. It was unmistakably Marla's voice, raw, unedited, recorded in a small room, singing a song no one had ever heard before. The lyrics told of a woman who felt watched, silenced, preparing to leave the city. It wasn't a sad goodbye. It was a warning, desperate and fierce. Reggie refused to explain where he got the tape. He only said she knew something. She was going to speak up, but I don't think she realized how dangerous it would be. The students handed the tape to police, but as always, nothing changed. Authorities said there was no concrete evidence connecting the song to a crime, They filed it under unverifiable when asked why a cry for help set to music wasn't enough. The students were told the same thing they'd heard before. We need something physical, a witness, a body. And so the silence returned for decades, until June 6th, 2023, nearly 28 years later, after 3 days of heavy rain. A section of an old highway in South Atlanta collapsed as construction workers dug through the landslide. Their machines hit something hard, the rusted front of a car, crushed deep in clay and mud. At first, it looked like just another abandoned wreck, until one of them spotted something jutting from the shattered window, an arm, fingernails chipped, but still stained red. The plate read GIA 4195. The 1993 Altima Marla had been driving the night she vanished. But if Marla disappeared in that storm back in '95, then how was the demo tape recorded 2 weeks later? News of the car found buried beneath layers of clay and rubble spread quickly across Atlanta. Local TV stations, many of which hadn't uttered Marla Jackson's name in decades, suddenly put her back in the spotlight. The first images from the scene showed the silver Altima crushed and mangled after nearly 30 years underground. Its windows were shattered, the frame buckled, and inside the driver's seat were human remains, identified not by DNA, but by a worn denim jacket and a small music note necklace, a birthday gift from Marla's mother in 1994. But something didn't add up. The initial coroner's report noted the skeletal remains were incomplete. The skulls showed signs of blunt force trauma inconsistent with a standard car accident. More puzzling was the position of the body, no seatbelt. The torso slumped toward the passenger side, suggesting it had been placed there post-mortem, though not officially confirmed. Lead investigator Lieutenant Geneva Harris of the Fulton County Police wrote in her notes, possible post-mortem placement. Surrounding soil must be examined. Geneva Harris, a seasoned officer and the first black woman to lead a major crimes unit in Atlanta, wasn't easy to fool. She immediately ordered a full review of the original 1995 case files, including witness statements that had been glossed over or poorly documented. One detail jumped out: a night security guard named Alvin Quince, stationed near Mason Hall the evening Marla vanished. In his original statement, Alvin claimed he saw a man in a gray baseball cap hastily leave the parking lot around 6:30 p.m., driving what looked like a silver Altima. When pressed for more detail, he couldn't recall the plate and didn't see the man's face. Crucially, this lead had never been followed up. When Geneva reviewed the interrogation records, she found the audio tape missing. Only a typed transcript remained, and that version didn't mention the gray cap or the Altima driving off. A clerical error, or something deliberately omitted. She kept digging. Among archived photos of the 1995 scene, Geneva found one image never made public: faint tire marks at the edge of the back lot near Mason Hall. The original case notes dismissed them as unrelated, likely another vehicle, but Geneva, with nearly 2 decades of experience, saw it differently. Those marks looked like someone leaving in a hurry. She began to form a theory Marla didn't leave that night on her own. Someone else drove the car. And maybe Marla wasn't even dead when that vehicle left the venue. Days later, Geneva convened a closed-door meeting with people who'd been close to Marla in her final days Kenya, her best friend, Mrs. Elaine Parker, a former teacher, and Reggie, the sound technician who'd handed over the now infamous demo tape. The atmosphere was tense. Geneva walked them through the timeline, asking each to recall what they knew. Kenya brought up a telling detail. Marla seemed uneasy, not panicked, just guarded. She told me if her song was performed the way she intended, some folks were going to be real mad. Reggie, silent at first, eventually admitted something critical: he had recorded the demo 2 weeks after Marla went missing. I didn't know she was gone. He said, I thought she was just laying low. She booked time at a little hourly studio in Forest Park, said she needed a quick cut raw, no edits to send to someone. That stopped Geneva cold. If Marla was still alive 2 weeks later, she didn't die in the rain that night, which raised an even darker question: who was in that car? The forensic puzzle grew stranger. The clothing and necklace belonged to Marla. But fragments of hair and fingerprints found in the car didn't fully match her biometric records. A partial match, roughly 80%. The forensics team reported high likelihood this is the same individual, but cannot rule out contamination or third-party DNA. A chilling new theory emerged. What if someone staged the scene? What if the body wasn't Marla's at all? Meanwhile, one of Geneva's team members, under her direction, began scouring the land near the highway collapse. Roughly 200 meters from the site stood an abandoned warehouse. Shuttered since the late 90s, it once belonged to a short-lived private label called Skyline Sound. The company had signed a handful of indie artists before folding amid lawsuits over debt and allegations of misconduct. Geneva ordered a full records search in Skyline's old A&R audition logs. One name appeared 3 times in 1995, M.J., no date, no phone number, just a note, raw voice, high potential, needs controlling. That phrase, needs controlling, made Geneva shudder. She'd seen it before, usually in old industry files describing artists considered a liability if they talked too much. She needed a new angle, a new lens. Geneva went back to the Emory student documentary from 1998, the one largely ignored. In a brief shot of Marla's dorm, the camera panned across her walls, past sticky notes and posters. Geneva froze a frame in the corner, an old photo, Marla standing beside a man in a suit. His hand on her shoulder, face blurred, but Geneva recognized the posture. This wasn't a classmate, it looked like someone from the business, cross-referencing old industry rosters. Geneva identified the man Franklin DeWitt, former head of A&R at Skyline Sound. Later, a freelance consultant in a 1997 news brief. He'd been accused of misconduct by 2 underage artists, but the case was dropped for lack of evidence. Geneva traced his last known address, but DeWitt had died in 2019 in a suspicious car crash. However, his ex-wife, Clarice, still lived in Decatur. Clarice agreed to meet. Reluctantly, in a quiet, hour-long conversation. She recalled a girl with a voice like an angel who came to our house a few times in '95. She remembered her name, Marla, and her sad, searching eyes. But what caught Geneva's attention was this: Marla had once forgotten a cassette tape at their house. Franklin had hidden it away, saying this tape could ruin the label. When Geneva asked if it still existed, Clarice hesitated, then disappeared into her bedroom. Minutes later, she returned with a small wooden box. Inside was a cassette labeled in handwriting, Marla Private 05-95. Geneva rushed it to digital conversion. She had no idea what she was about to hear. The tape began with a faint breath, then Marla's voice, not singing, but whispering, shaking. I don't know if I'm safe saying this, but if someone finds this, just know I never left on my own. They know I have a copy. They said they'd take care of it if I didn't stay quiet. In that moment, Geneva knew this was no disappearance. This was a silencing, a premeditated act. And if Marla was telling the truth, she may not have died that stormy night, at least not right away, and she was not alone. Now, for the first time. Well, revisit that night, not through rumor, not through records, but through Marla's own words. From the tape someone tried to bury for nearly 30 years, immediately after listening to the tape. Lieutenant Geneva Harris called an emergency meeting with the forensics team, the crime scene unit, and the voice analysis department. The session lasted over 3 hours, focused on 3 critical points: the tape's authenticity, voice identification, and the potential to trace its recording location. The final report confirmed the voice on the tape was almost certainly Marla Jackson's, a 97% match with archived recordings from WCLK radio. Background noise on the tape, a metallic fan hum. Distant train horns suggested the recording took place near the southern rail line of the city. That detail triggered a memory. Geneva recalled an old studio shed once past Heron Point, a once secret haven for indie artists in the 90s, later shut down due to code violations when investigators arrived. The site was abandoned, overgrown with ivy, its windows shattered. But inside the old audio control room, signs of recent activity were evident: fresh cigarette butts, footprints in the dust, a tampered electrical panel. Geneva ordered a full sweep of the studio and surrounding area. In a rusted drawer of the mixing desk, they found an old bundle of papers tied with coarse string. On the cover, 3 handwritten words: session log. Inside were engineer notes, session dates, artist names, track titles, and one entry stood out: MJ 05-14-95, 8:30 p.m. song, letters I never sent, live take. No mix. It meant Marla had recorded her song, not on stage. But here, at the exact time the showcase was happening across town, this revelation flipped the entire case. If Marla never intended to appear at Mason Hall, but instead snuck off to Heron Point to record the real version of her song, was it a decoy, a secret meeting, or a backup plan because she knew she was being watched? But that wasn't all. Geneva had the session log tested for ink and fingerprint analysis on the final page. A faint but clear print surfaced. It matched a name no one expected: Maurice Langston, a legendary music executive, now CEO of Phoenix South Records, hailed in the early 2000s as the kingmaker of black voices in Atlanta. Maurice was once vice president at Skyline Sound. And now, it appeared he had crossed paths with Marla Jackson in that same abandoned studio, near those train tracks. The moment his name entered the file, Geneva launched a deep dive investigation into his ties to Skyline Sound and every artist he had developed, especially young. Unsigned women. One internal memo from Skyline's New Voices initiative in 1995 showed Maurice, then in his early 30s, actively scouting unrepresented talent. Among the files was a note: M. Jackson Soul, raw, uncooperative, hard to control, untapped potential. That phrase, hard to control, appeared again. And this time, it couldn't be coincidence. Geneva now suspected Marla may have uncovered something shady or refused to comply with manipulative contract terms and became a risk. But what puzzled her was why someone like Maurice, with a polished legacy and decades of influence, had left such a trace in a case buried for nearly 30 years. Then came the tipping point from an unexpected source. A whistleblower inside Phoenix South called the department's anonymous tip line. The voice, disguised, left a chilling message. If you want to know what really happened, ask Langston about the quiet fund at Skyline. There were cameras, bait contracts. Marla wasn't the first, but maybe she was the first who refused to stay quiet the very same day. Geneva received results from a supplemental DNA test on the dental remains found in the car. The results were conclusive. The body was Marla Jackson. But the real shock came from the estimated time of death based on tissue decomposition and bone calcification. Time of death is estimated between late May and mid-June 1995, which meant Marla didn't die the night she disappeared. She was alive for at least several weeks after. That finding shattered every theory of accident or voluntary departure. Marla had been held and likely tortured before her body was arranged inside her car and buried off-road. Someone had staged it to look like a crash. Maurice Langston wasn't just a suspect. He might be the linchpin of an entire power structure, one that had operated unchecked for years. But to bring him down, Geneva needed more than whispers. She needed undeniable proof. She turned back to Heron Point, with help from an aging technician who once worked there. Geneva and her team began physically inspecting the building's infrastructure. In the ceiling above the old mixing booth, they discovered a sealed utility cavity untouched since 1995. Inside was a tin box, coated in dust and cobwebs. Inside the box, 3 VHS tapes, a damaged computer hard drive, and a manila envelope stuffed with Polaroid's dimly lit studio shots. Young artists, mid-performance, and Marla Jackson among them. One VHS tape was rushed to digitization. What it showed stunned the entire team. Footage of Marla entering the studio, visibly tense, seated across from a man whose face stayed mostly off camera, but whose voice was unmistakable. Audio analysis confirmed Maurice Langston in the video. He pressures Marla to sign a non-disclosure agreement, one riddled with illegal terms, bans on discussing her sessions, releasing her music, or mentioning internal meetings. Marla refuses. She stands up, voice clear, "I'm not signing. You don't get to take my voice and lock it away." And that was the last known footage of her alive. Geneva moved swiftly, filing a petition for a grand jury subpoena. But she knew bringing down a man like Maurice Langston with deep connections, top-tier attorneys, and a public image built on uplifting black talent wouldn't be easy, even with the tape. It could be dismissed as circumstantial, lacking a confirmed timestamp. Then, During a police press conference prompted by leaks about the VHS footage, a stranger stood up. A middle-aged woman, not in any records, spoke just one sentence. "I was taken to that studio too, but I was luckier than Marla. I got away." All eyes turned. Officers quickly escorted the woman for questioning, and just like that, a new door opened. Not just for Marla's case, but possibly for dozens more, because Marla Jackson wasn't the only one, and the system that took her may go deeper than anyone ever imagined. Her name was Rochelle Baker, 48 years old, once an aspiring singer in Atlanta's West Side during the mid-90s. In her initial statement, Rochelle revealed she had been invited to record at Heron Point in March of 1995, shortly after performing an original song at an open mic. The man who approached her was none other than Maurice Langston, presenting himself as a talent scout for Skyline Sound. Rochelle, just 18 at the time, was eager and trusting. Langston had promised she could cut a record within 6 months, but Heron Point wasn't what she expected. The studio was dark. There were cameras, but no visible technicians. They asked me to sing something for a test, then handed me a temporary contract. Rochelle recalled, when I asked to read it first, they said I could look at it later, when she refused to sign on the spot. Langston's demeanor shifted, the charm was gone. Rochelle tried to leave, but found another man blocking the exit, not a sound engineer. I didn't know who he was, but the look in his eyes told me if I didn't think fast, I wouldn't leave that place safely. She faked a dizzy spell and asked to use the bathroom. Luckily, it had a small window. Rochelle climbed out and ran over 3 miles to a friend's home. She told no one for years, fearing retaliation. But after seeing Marla Jackson's face on the news and that now infamous VHS clip, Rochelle knew it was time to speak. Her testimony unveiled a horrifying possibility. Heron Point wasn't just a recording studio. It may have been used to coerce, manipulate, and even illegally detain young women in the music industry. As public outrage swelled, the investigation team faced an alarming discovery. Almost all official records tied to Heron Point were gone. No construction permits, no safety reports, no rental contracts. The IRS listed no financial activity past 1994, yet someone was clearly using the studio well into 1995. Someone had erased it, and Geneva had to ask who had the power to do that. The answer came from outside law enforcement. Marcus Eldon, an independent journalist who had been covering Southern music since the 90s, submitted a folder he'd kept from an old, unfinished expos on Skyline Sound. Inside internal budget allocations and one odd line item, internal security expenses, Heron Point Q2, 1995, $42,000. The money didn't appear in Skyline's official tax filings. Geneva exhaled sharply. This wasn't about a single girl. It was a network, with Rochelle's testimony and Marcus's documents. A special task force was formed, a coalition of law enforcement, civil rights lawyers, and independent journalists. They agreed to solve Marla Jackson's case. They had to open a full-scale investigation into Skyline Sound and its affiliated entities from 1990 to 2000. As they combed through records, at least 6 young women surfaced. All had auditioned or held unsigned contracts with Skyline, and then vanished from the industry. Some moved out of state. Others claimed they quit music due to stress. But when contacted, most refused to speak, all except one, Tamika Rose, under anonymity. Tamika revealed that in the summer of 1995, she'd seen Marla at a private meeting organized by Langston at a small hotel in College Park. Marla wasn't like anyone else there. She said, "She looked straight at everyone, not scared. I remember because she was the only one in denim. Everyone else wore suits." Tamika confirmed what Rochelle had implied. These weren't music meetings. They happened late at night. There were no real contracts, just vague promises tied to conditions never fully explained. After that night, Marla vanished. I never saw her again, Tamika said, tears welling. You ever try reporting a man backed by an entire industry? The distrust wasn't just among victims, even within Geneva's own team. Cracks began to show. Sergeant Malcolm Owens, young, normally dependable, started skipping briefings, citing personal matters. When Geneva pressed him, his response was cryptic. Some things are better left alone. Digging deeper. She discovered Malcolm had an older brother, Quentin Owens, a former sound engineer at Skyline Sound, fired abruptly in 1995 for ethical violations. Though no details were ever given, Geneva realized victims weren't the only ones silenced. Staff, artists, even officers all bore scars they didn't dare voice. More names began surfacing: investors, corporate attorneys, music journalists who declined to run stories due to lack of evidence. Marla's case was no longer about who had done it. It had become a tangled web of silence, fear, and compromise. In the middle of it all, only one voice remained pure. Marla's preserved on that final demo tape: "I don't want to be a victim, but if I disappear, at least someone will know why." Geneva, chasing one last lead, returned to the small apartment where Marla once lived with her mother. Ruby had long since moved, but the current tenant had kept some of Marla's old belongings, a quiet tribute from a neighborhood that still remembered her. Inside the dusty room, sunlight streaming through old curtains. Geneva scanned the space: a desk, a tape shelf, and tucked in the third drawer, a wooden box filled with handwritten lyrics in Marla's neat script. Between the pages was a letter never sent, written in black ink on yellow paper. "No addressee, if you're reading this. It means I didn't make it back. I'm not scared, just tired. People keep telling me to stop singing what I know, but if I do what's left of me, don't let this voice go out. Use it in the way I never got to." Geneva folded the letter and slipped it into her coat, not as evidence, but as a promise. Then she found something else: an old ID badge. Skyline technician, Shadjur 17. Name, Quentin Owens. In the original technical records, Geneva had flagged. A handwritten note appeared next to a May 1995 session. Urashim 17. Refused procedure, reported to management. Quentin had witnessed something, maybe protested, and was forced out. Geneva called Malcolm in privately, not as an officer, but as a brother. The conversation stretched nearly 2 hours, fragmented and quiet. Eventually, Malcolm confessed. "My brother said something terrible happened that night. One artist was kept after recording." There was screaming. The next morning, the studio was wiped clean. Even the tapes were gone. He filed an internal report, but then they fired him, threatened to sue him for breach of contract. He paused. "I don't know what happened to Marla, but my brother, he was never the same after that night." With Malcolm's testimony, Marla's tape, her letter, and the VHS footage from Heron Point, Geneva had enough to escalate the case federally. But as soon as the file was submitted, a letter appeared at her desk, anonymous. "Be careful what you're about to uncover. Some secrets are meant to stay buried along with the ones who tried to speak them. So now the question isn't whether the truth is coming to light, it's who's still trying to keep it in the dark." The federal investigation into the death of Marla Jackson officially launched in August 2023, nearly 28 years after the night she disappeared. At the press conference announcing the case's reopening, Geneva Harris didn't say much. She simply placed a photo on the table in front of her Marla. Age 22, smiling as she clutched her worn wooden guitar in the dorm courtyard. "We're not investigating a crime." Geneva said, "We're fighting for a person and for the hundreds just like her, whose names were never known." The story spread fast. Local TV stations, true crime podcasts, and soul music fans began speaking Marla Jackson's name again, not as a victim, but as a symbol of a voice that had once been silenced. On social media, people who had once heard her sing resurfaced old cassette recordings and shared rare audio clips. A music analysis YouTube channel suggested that much of Letters I Never Sent was filled with metaphors about power, control, and fear, a protest in song that no one had dared to interpret correctly. But just when it seemed like the truth might finally surface, it hit harder than Geneva had imagined. The VHS tape, the one showing Marla refusing to sign a contract, was ruled inadmissible in court. A technicality: the recording had no confirmed timestamp, and an independent analysis hired by Phoenix South's legal team, now run by Maurice Langston's son, claimed the footage showed signs of possible tampering. Worse still, many of the witnesses, including Rochelle and Tamika, began withdrawing their statements, citing a need for peace and privacy. An anonymous lawyer said, "When power feels threatened, it doesn't dismantle itself. It patches the cracks, then hides the damage." Geneva sat in silence in her office. In front of her, a 600-page file filled with testimonies, photos, timelines, but each line carrying one painful question. Will it be enough? She knew justice was a winding, uneven road, but she also knew Marla never stayed silent, and telling her story in the right voice was part of that path, that night. Geneva went home and played Letters I Never Sent. The guitar was soft, solitary. Then Marla's voice emerged again, and Geneva knew no matter how many forces tried to bury it, that voice still resonated, still reached someone. 1 month after the case was handed off to federal authorities, it appeared everything had stalled, buried in legal loopholes and invisible pressure from powerful names. Yet something extraordinary was happening outside the courtroom. The name Marla Jackson ignited a movement, a hashtag campaign. George Justice. For Marla began spreading, not just across Atlanta, but nationwide, especially in cities where Black communities had seen too many disappearances fade into silence, at Clark Atlanta University. Students organized a tribute performance at Mason Hall, the very venue Marla had been scheduled to perform at the night she vanished. They built a small stage, played her recordings, and read aloud excerpts from her final. Unsent letter. No one stayed dry-eyed when the final words rang out. I'm not afraid anymore. If my voice is all that's left, let it live for me. In that moment, it became clear they weren't just mourning a singer. They were grieving a generation silenced, controlled, and erased. A group of independent journalists released a digital documentary archive titled The Silenced Voice. Compiling every record, photo, and unused lead, it was made freely available to protect memory from power. Inside, it was a detail never aired publicly, a private letter between Maurice Langston and an unnamed executive, in which Langston wrote, if she won't sign. Use Plan B. I don't want this becoming precedent. What Plan B entailed wasn't specified, but after that, a grassroots network of journalists, students, and ex-industry workers began mapping cases of missing or silenced Black female artists from 1993 to 1998 alone. Over 30 names surfaced women who had disappeared, suddenly quit music, or never released a single track. The silence wasn't accidental, it was engineered. Even after stepping down as lead investigator, Geneva kept sending evidence to young journalists still chasing the truth. One night, she received an anonymous email, "They're watching you, be careful." Attached was a previously unheard audio clip, Marla's laughter, followed by her voice saying, "If they cut me off halfway, at least they'll have to hear me one more time." Geneva pressed play, and once again, Marla's voice filled the room, not a cry for help, but a promise. This story isn't done. One fall afternoon in College Park, Ruby Marla's mother walked slowly along a dirt path behind the old church where her daughter once sang in the children's choir. She held in her hands a restored version of Letters I Never Sent, remastered by music students who said this song deserves to be heard the way Marla intended. The release didn't happen in a grand theater. It was at a public park, kids playing, families gathered, a Bluetooth speaker humming softly. And there, Marla's voice, quiet but unshakable, played for the world. The song spread like wildfire. Not through marketing, but through meaning. Marla became a symbol not of loss, but of what was never allowed to be. People printed her face on t-shirts. Her words appeared in murals. A scholarship was named after her for young Black women pursuing music without chasing commercial molds. And yet, for all the tributes, Geneva couldn't deliver justice in the traditional sense. The federal hearing was postponed indefinitely. Key witnesses backed out. Crucial documents were now under question. Industry insiders began whispering, maybe Marla's best as a legend. Let's not complicate that. But Geneva didn't believe that. In her final interview before retiring, she said, "The truth doesn't need everyone to believe it. It just needs to be recorded somewhere, so someone, someday, will read it and understand." Marla didn't need saving, she needed to be heard, and so. The last lines in the official case file weren't a verdict. They were handwritten by Geneva herself. She didn't die in the rain. She was made to disappear by people who believed a Black woman's voice was something they could control. But what they didn't understand is that once a voice is truly raised, it outlives any contract. At a renovated dorm room, now used as a student-run recording studio, Marla's first demo, Scratchy, Rough, Imperfect, is still played every time someone records their first song. It's a quiet ritual, a way to say I hear you. Marla came first. Now it's your turn. It's your. Marla Jackson was never just another missing person. She was the echo of hundreds of voices, once silenced for refusing to stay silent. This story doesn't end with a verdict. It leaves behind something larger. Who are we listening to, and who have we left behind, if one day? Amidst the noise, you hear a voice rise. Don't tune it out. It just might be the sound of truth trying to find its way back. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen.